Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Close. I'm the founder of diaTribe, and let me give you a rundown of today's event. We're going to be in really cool conversation, and this is a big topic, so say buckle up. I'm going to get to make a few opening remarks, and then we're going to start our panel discussion. And at the end of the panel, throughout the panel, we want to make sure that you guys know, everyone in the audience, we'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. So there's going to be time for your questions. It's going to be followed by a special performance, which we're so excited about, by our panelist and former American Idol contestant, Crystal Bowersox. And I know there are a lot of people here who are Crystal groupies like me, so you're going to be in good company. After that, we're going to have our next networking open again, the expo booth, for you to spend some more time in. So today, we're going to talk about a pretty serious topic, one that's really close to my heart: hypoglycemia, severe hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. And just so you know where I'm coming from, in the first 12 years that I had diabetes, I'm almost at 35 years now, but in the first 12 years, I was diagnosed with severe hypoglycemia. I got that formal in the hospital. You have severe hypoglycemia. You can't wake up, all of that kind of stuff, 24 times. So this conversation isn't theoretical for me. About 267,000 people with diabetes go to the emergency room every year with severe low blood sugar. That is crazy, right? So that data is from CDC. That's 9% of people with type 1 went to the emergency room. 4% were hospitalized, stayed there because of the low blood sugar. I've done both multiple times. Although those were in the first 12 years with diabetes, I absolutely was a frequent flyer, as they say, in the ER. And, it's not that funny of a phrase, right? The fact that hundreds of thousands of people, this happens every year too, with type 1 and type 2 in the US alone. The fact that we could all collectively do something about that is really cool. And a bunch of really smart people who are here with me today, who are going to be coming in with me today, are going to talk to us all about that. So, because it doesn't need to be that way, we can all really join in a lot of ways of addressing this. I think I could have avoided every single one of my ER visits, ambulance rides, all of them could have been avoided, if I had the tools that were available now. And I'm saying these ambulance rides where your eyes are closed because you're completely passed out from severe hypo. You're looking up, and then there's this moment where you open your eyes, and then you just shut your eyes again because you cannot believe that you're in this body, that you're in this experience. Hundreds of thousands of people live through this every day, every year rather, but all these people like you and me live through this daily in the United States and around the world. And it doesn't have to be that way. And we know that it's good that those numbers are actually down a bunch from the days when there wasn't stable insulin. So that's helped some of us, those of us who are lucky enough to get more stable insulin than there was a couple of decades ago. Obviously, diabetes technology has been transformational for many of us who are lucky enough to have CGM, to have down arrows, to have accurate glucose monitors. There's been a lot of cool things. The closed loop, obviously, but there's transformatively better Glucagon today, and that's what we're going to talk about. So that's a super valuable resource that I get now. It's just part of my diabetes toolkit, and that has been the case since 2019 when we had a couple cool rescue therapies approved, and another one just recently. So there are 3 now. And while I do experience fewer severe lows, again, because of all of these other pieces, I'm so glad that it's here. The best thing is if you have it and don't use it, right? So we're going to do a poll now, if this works, to find out how many of you have some form of glucagon. If you're a patient, or if you're here, maybe if you're a care partner, a caregiver, you can answer for them, but just click the poll tab to the right of your screen to answer. So in 2015, fewer than half of people with type 1 diabetes and astoundingly under 3% of people with type 2 diabetes had a failed prescription for glucagon. That is a prescription that wasn't expired. And that's despite the fact that well over half of the people with type 2 diabetes take insulin, or they take sulfonylureas to treat their diabetes. Going back to when I was diagnosed, and that's the mid-'80s, but all the way up to 2019, the only format available for glucagon involved drying up saline into a syringe, injecting it into a vial with glucagon powder, mixing it, and then drawing it back into the syringe for injection. And this was pretty stressful. So old glucagon was cumbersome, more than a little scary for caregivers, care partners, parents, grandparents, friends, whoever might need to give it to an unconscious loved one. And I've drawn it up for myself before, but now we want to move to a different place, and where our world kind of looks like globally, no one should have to use it, and everyone taking insulin, at least, let's start there, should have next generation glucagon, new glucagon, and there are a bunch of different options, which is, I say thank you, heart on hand on heart, to all of the researchers, all of the patients who did these trials. So there's Lilly's Baqsimi, which is a nasal puff. There's the Gvoke HypoPen by Xeris, and Zealand's Zegalogue injectable glucagon. I've not tried yet because it just got approved. And thank you to the FDA. Thank you to the FDA for so many things, and especially speeding these new therapies through. That's going to be on the market in July. So, and so we wanted to take time at today's panel to kind of have everybody learn about low blood glucose, like what's happening, to explore new opportunities that might become available in the future to use glucagon for keeping blood glucose in tighter range, even that's beyond a rescue treatment, but something called microdosing. We're going to also talk about a cool dual hormone approach to the closed loop. I know a bunch of people here are lucky, like I am, that they have the opportunity to use the closed loop. So, but above all, first, we want everybody at risk for severe hypo to have better peace of mind. We want you to have better productivity. We want me to have better productivity. We want better quality of life, but better mental health, better emotional well-being. So as always, I want to thank all of our incredibly generous sponsors who have made it just so possible for diaTribe to exist, and you make possible everything that we do. And if we were together in person, your names would be in lights. So huge thank you to our generous presenting sponsor, One Drop. Thanks to our amazing gold sponsor, Abbott. And thank you to silver sponsors, Lilly Diabetes, Xeris Pharma, Zealand, AstraZeneca, Dexcom, Jumpay, Medtronic, Novo Nordisk, Prevention Bio, and Vertex. It means the world to us that you're making possible what you're making possible for us as a nonprofit entity. You're giving us the opportunity to write and learn more with online events like this, to listen more. So without further ado, I'm really thrilled to welcome the following leaders to explore today's topic of hypoglycemia and next generation glucagon. Next, we have Dr. Stephen Russell, who has transferred the very prestigious Mass General Diabetes Clinical Research Center from, again, the landmark and the first DCCT location to a rural technology powerhouse. So Steve is really known for bringing vim and vigor into the clinic, so well known for excellence, pushing its boundaries in its approach to technology. Through dozens of clinical trials, Steve has massively advanced closed-loop insulin delivery, and his research is at the center of the creation of the first bi-hormonal bionic pancreas, which we're going to learn more about during the panel. And so, big tip of our hat to his practice. That's led by the inimitable Dr. David Nathan. Next, we have Paul Edick, CEO of Xeris Pharmaceuticals. And I'm never going to forget when I first met Paul, because he came to San Francisco. And whenever there's a new leader, of a diabetes organization, we always invite them to come to Haight Street here in San Francisco and to meet our teams. at diaTribe, at Close Concerns, and at DQ&A. And Paul really did it. I came here in person with some of his team, and he was so interested. I still so remember, it's like he is today. You'll see, but just like leaning forward, wanting to know all of these details about like how do we as patients feel, and why is it this way? And he connected with everyone. He had a really very, very impressive career, being real expert on the antibiotic front, on the infection front. He came out of retirement when he heard about this opportunity on the glucagon front. So was really inspired by the opportunity to positively impact the lived experience of people with diabetes. And he's really leveraging his experience and his talents to do exactly that. So rounding out the panel, we have this amazing musician and diabetes advocate, Crystal Bowersox. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 6. She was, effectively a professional musician by age 10. She's brought diabetes with her to the main stage in so many different places, in so many different ways. And she's really okay with bringing vulnerability, with bringing so many examples of what it's like to live with diabetes. She's a finalist on American Idol. She didn't let diabetes stop her, and she's really used her platform to empower people with diabetes and to destigmatize the disease. Like, she's actively about that. I'm such a major fan. I'm sure you can tell what a groupie I am. I saw her perform for the very first time at Children with Diabetes. Thank you, Jeff Hitchcock. Thank you, Carrie. And I all the time I'm listening to her music late into the night. I'm just in awe of her bravery, and again, her ability to just let us all see how vulnerable she can be. And through that, she kind of normalizes diabetes experience. She makes all of us feel really seen, and she makes everybody else have a lot better idea of what it's like. So check out her No Before the Low campaign that helps people with diabetes avoid hypoglycemia. She's working with Lily on that, which has been amazing to be able to see how we change people's attitudes and deal with the fear and stress that is super real that go along with it. So please go to her website and her YouTube pages. We're going to post the links in chat. And afterwards, following the panel, we're going to have we're going to be broadcasting Crystal performing through video. She was kind enough to share with us. And then you and I can also meet every month on Sundays, and we can listen to her play. She's a working musician from Nashville. So this is amazing to have all of us here in company, in conversation, in community together. And I guess, what we would say is, like, as people with diabetes, we have in common a diagnosis, and then everybody's story is really different. And like this, all of these voices on our panel today, they all have unique experiences, unique backgrounds, and they also all have something in common, which is they're incredible leaders in their fields, and they bring immense caring for people living with diabetes. Hey, you guys, how are you? It's so nice to see you.
Good to see you, Kelly.
Great to see you, Kelly.
Oh my gosh, I've just been learning so much from you as all of you have put your minds together with ours and helped kind of talk about what are the things that what are the things that we want to help people learn. So first, okay, I don't know, Steve, or I think Steve, you should help us with this first one. So Steve, let's just start by learning a little bit about Glucagon, because we have a bunch of guests here also who are who again are care partners, but they don't have diabetes themselves. So Steve, explain it to me like I'm hearing about this stuff for the first time. Can you give us a quick overview of what glucagon is and how it functions in the body?
Sure. Well, glucagon is a hormone that, like insulin, is produced in the islets of the pancreas, and it's sort of the anti-insulin. It works especially in the liver of the body to do exactly the opposite of what insulin does. Insulin lowers blood glucose, glucagon raises it. And it normally is produced when the pancreas is working normally and there's no diabetes, it tends to kick in when dropping close to the normal range. For instance, after it's gone up a little bit after a meal and it comes back down towards the normal range, there's often a little glucagon released then. It also is released during periods where you're fasting. And unfortunately, in type 1 diabetes, in addition to the beta cells that make the insulin getting destroyed, the glucagon producing cells are still there. They're not destroyed, but in the absence of those beta cells, they don't respond anymore to hypoglycemia. And that makes people with diabetes much more vulnerable to lows. And so, you know, when somebody has an extreme low, it's really the best approach to treat that extreme low. If they have an extreme low and they're not able to take oral carbohydrates, injecting some of that glucagon, it does the same job that it normally does in the body, works to counter the effects of insulin in the liver, makes the liver actually release stored glucose into the bloodstream and raise the blood glucose, and that can get someone out of a bad situation.
Now you tell it to us like it is. Like, why would that happen? Why would somebody need it?
Why would somebody need an emergency rescue plan? Well, for example, myself, I'm a performer, and lows happen anywhere, anytime. Even if you've taken all the precautions, you feel like everything's working out. I've had lows on stage during performances and have needed assistance in those moments. So having a rescue plan in place is really important. So part of that for me is to let the people around me know how they can help me if that situation were to arise.
How hard can that be to do? You have a special way of making people feel. So yeah, how do you do that?
Well, I'm much better at it now at age 35, but I'd say 10 years ago it was a little harder for me. For folks who don't know, I was on American Idol back in 2010, and I was very quiet about having type 1. And I just didn't really, sorry if you can hear my neighbor's lawnmower. I just really didn't want people around me to know that I lived with diabetes, because I didn't want to be treated differently. So it was a hard conversation for me to bring up. However, I've learned throughout the years that it's the most important thing to do is to let folks around you know, to have a support network in place of people you know and trust. And the more you talk about it, the easier it gets.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Paul with a question that kind of goes into some of the things that we've learned about old glucagon versus new glucagon. But just for Steve, I wanted to ask, can you just say a little bit more about how can glucagon be used in diabetes care today, and who needs to be using it?
Well, right now there's one FDA cleared use for glucagon, which is in that case of a severe hypoglycemia. And we define that as one that requires help from somebody else. If you're able to manage it yourself and able to take carbs, no matter how low the actual glucose is, we don't call that a severe hypoglycemia. It's one where you need help. And so that is the currently approved indication. Somebody can't take carbs because they're either confused or unconscious. A shot of glucagon can bring them back. Now, there's other uses that are either off-label or are experimental. One of those is if somebody is going low and they're not unconscious, but they're not able to eat carbs for some reason, or not able to absorb carbs because maybe they have a gastrointestinal illness and they're vomiting, or for whatever reason they take carbs, they don't just seem to be working the way they expect them to. And then that's another option where glucagon can be used to raise their blood glucose safely. Often in that case, or at least sometimes, a partial dose is given. You don't necessarily take the whole dose. And then
so that then your blood sugar doesn't go way up. And for the people here who feel like this sounds sort of complicated, like like it's just complicated. Life with diabetes is complicated pretty much.
It's a lot more complicated.
Day.
Yeah, it's a lot more complicated to have EMTs come out and put in a IV and give you glucose IV, and that's what these glucagons allow you to avoid, and you can treat that severe, a bystander, a loved one can treat it much more quickly. You don't have to wait for that ambulance to come. And so it really is an important option to have.
Yeah, it's completely critical. And when Steve was in the office the other day, we were saying, so how's it work? And he was kind of showing off his electronic health records, and the two that are approved, Gvoke and Baqsimi, both came up right away. And we also know that for many people who are seeing their healthcare teams, if they're lucky enough that their healthcare teams have time, like Steve, to ask them, how are you doing on insulin? How are you doing on glucagon? Do you need anything? Sometimes the electronic health record will actually put the old traditional glucagon in. And that can happen for a bunch of, really crazy reasons. So for people to say, what am I getting? That's something that I would totally recommend doing. I want to go to you, Paul. So a study was done by our sister organization, DQ&A, in 2019, and that showed that only 38% of people with diabetes at risk for hypoglycemia felt confident that they could successfully administer glucagon from a traditional kit. 38%. But new formats are, showing that already, even though they haven't even been approved that long, they're reaching confidence levels already as high as 75%. So can you just talk about what's different now and how are the new formats better?
Yeah, Kelly, bottom line is, as you've said multiple times, and everybody knows, those kits and the ability to reconstitute yourself, that's not happening. And a bystander, by and large, is not going to do it correctly. And what the FDA requires that we do what they call human factors studies, where you actually put people in a stressful situation and you have them execute the kit. And in the best of those studies, people got it wrong 70% of the time. The new ready-to-use glucagons, either the nasal, we have an auto-injector, a pre-filled syringe. We had to do the same human factors trials with people that you put them in a stressful situation and they have to actually administer either themselves or a mannequin on the floor. And people got it right 99% of the time. I think there was, maybe one person that pulled the auto injector up too soon. These new forms of ready-to-use glucagon are so easy. And as Steve says, they're not competing with your ability to eat. They're not competing with your ability to drink or ingest carbohydrates. It's when those aren't working. When you get to the point that that's not working, your 15-15 rule, you've tried it a couple of times. When it's not working, that now you have options that are executable and they work beautifully, they work fast. The other thing too is, and I think Steve was alluding to it a little bit, self-administration is now an option. With an auto injector, you pull the red cap off, you press the yellow cap down on your leg or your abdomen, hold it for 5 seconds, you're done. Same with the nasal. So not everybody has somebody with them all the time. Not everybody has a caregiver. There's a lot of young people. COVID-19, how many people are living home alone?
Right.
Having one of these new forms that you can self-administer is night and day from what it's been for the last 30, 40 years.
It's completely night and day. And Crystal, not even like living alone, but like living on the streets, right?
Crystal's
and I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yeah.
I said I actually wanted to jump in there. The human factors studies are really interesting to me, and I'm just curious to know what the age group is of people who would need to jump in to help. I'm a single mom. I live with my 12-year-old son, and if he is my support network. So I couldn't imagine, living alone. Being able to self-administer a rescue plan is a wonderful option to have, and also having an option that doesn't scare the daylights out of my son to use on mom if she needs it is really important too.
And, to your point, Crystal, we haven't done a study in different age groups, but we interact with patients all the time, and we have people call us all the time. There's a lot of people who are influencers in the community. The number of people that have said, yeah, my son grabbed my Gvoke HypoPen out of my purse and rescued me. It's really, it's wonderful to hear. It's just wonderful to hear. We've had doctors' offices where, we've left one or here and there in different doctors' offices, and they said, yeah, we had a patient who went severely low and we use it right here in the office. The HypoPen changes the game. It just
Absolutely.
I just want to talk about just one more thing, Crystal, that I want to ask you about. Like, how did it work, your campaign? The no before the low. How did that start? How did you feel about it? Did you say yes right away? Tell us a little bit about it and where people can see it.
Sure. Well, I've been working with Lily as an ambassador for several years now, and my role with Lily has been in the past to go to camps for kids living with type 1 diabetes or living with diabetes, and I've really enjoyed that work. And then, of course, here we are in a pandemic, and Lily Diabetes and I, came up with a new way to try to have outreach and raise awareness. So it's just something that's really important in my world, of course, and all of us who are living with diabetes, is being prepared for these instances where we may need assistance if we're not unable to assist ourselves. So this is something I'm really proud to represent and proud to talk about and share with as many people as possible.
Well, it's so inspiring to hear you. I remember back when I was in college and later on, living with a bunch of people. I lived in Brooklyn decades ago, before it was cool to live in Brooklyn. I lived there, and just the kinds of ways that I would find myself explaining, oh, this thing might happen, but don't worry, because it won't happen. It's good. I'm fine. If you find me and I'm passed out, well, you won't, but if you do, here's what you do. And this is exactly what it looked like. And it was just kind of this weird, identity that was reinforcing that I felt stupid, and I felt stupid explaining it. And I even feel stupid right now. I can't even open it, and it's not intuitive. And it saved my life a bunch of times. And then sometimes medicine moves slowly, then there's something new that is available, and it takes a little while. And that's been a little bit frustrating for me to kind of figure out about that. But Steve, I want to go back to you and David. David is either a little, I'm hoping that he might be able to join us at the end. But so David, you're going to get double duty on some of these questions, that are for scientists, researchers, clinicians. But when do you think people should be using glucagon to treat hypoglycemia? Is there a risk of taking it too often? Does it have side effects? How does all of that work?
I think they should be using it, or a loved one should be using it any time that taking carbs isn't working, really. I don't think there's any risk of using it too often per se, but I would say that if you're having to use it very often, there's something wrong with your insulin regimen, and there should be some change to avoid that, because this really is supposed to be a backstop for when all the other things don't work, right? You should ideally have a continuous glucose monitor, and you should be able to see your trends, and you should have an alarm to tell you when there's a risk of hypoglycemia in the future, and you can take carbs. But if those things don't work, and you're in a position of either because you can't absorb them, or because they were insufficient, or you missed the alarm or something and you're low, that's the time to take it. But if that's happening on a somewhat of a regular basis, that's very concerning. Not because you're getting too much glucagon, but because it's clearly a high-risk situation, and there needs to be some sort of change made. And I think some of the automated insulin delivery systems that we have on the market now really can reduce the risk of that, because they can automatically reduce the insulin or suspend insulin delivery. But despite all those things, severe hypoglycemias happen, and when they do, this is the best solution.
Think about the fact that almost 300,000 people here in the US alone, where we invest the most in healthcare anywhere in the world. How does that make you feel that 300,000 people end up in the emergency room? And so we know, obviously, many hundreds of thousands more probably see the ambulance guys.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of something I think about many times a day, which is that diabetes is really, really hard. And it's extremely challenging to get insulin right. And we're constantly balancing ourselves between, you know, trying to get tight glycemic control to stay healthy for the long run. But, you know, if you're keeping really tight glycemic control, you're not very far away from that hypoglycemia place. And so it's just a tremendous challenge that people living with diabetes have to face every day.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to say to people, you know, like when Steve was saying, like, so something's wrong if this is happening a lot. I mean, it wasn't really very long ago. That would have been me in the audience, and I would have just felt like this, like, guilt, and I would have just like heard what he said and been like, God, like, let me like look away, let me sink through the floor. I mean, if it's you, there's like a bunch of reasons why that's true. It can change. But Paul, I just want to ask you as well, like 300,000, this is a really big number. You're a business guy. What do you think about? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with Steve. It's sad. It's unnecessary. You know, so there is the there's the part of managing your insulin, right? And everybody's trying to get that right. But there are reasons that it doesn't go right all the time. And the default has always been, you know, wait till you're passed out and have somebody use that old kit or call 911. With these new forms, with the Gvoke HypoPen is our form. There's the Baqsimi and the others. We can avoid that. You know, the bottom line is, if you think about it, if you are on insulin, I think the medical people will agree, you're at risk for a severe low. So anytime an insulin prescription is written, a glucagon, a ready-to-use glucagon prescription should be written. That just should be standard of care. That's just the case.
Well, yeah, it is standard of care. In fact, I heard that actually David Kendall is out in front, and so I want to say again, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Paul. God, but I get so excited when I think about like all the cool stuff that ADA is doing and is making happen. So like it is standard of care, I think.
So you're absolutely right. The ADA
how did that filter?
Yeah, the ADA guidelines say if you're on insulin, you should have glucagon handy. Yet 6.8 million, you know, use whatever number you want, 6 million, 7 million people on insulin, and that's not even including sulfonylureas. And only 10% of them fill a prescription for any form of glucagon in a given year. It should be 6 million people should be filling a prescription for ready-to-use glucagon.
I think that's partly on us as practitioners. I just want to make a point that I hope nobody feels guilt for having hypoglycemic episodes. I'm not trying to say that you're doing something wrong. It's just that there needs to be an adjustment if that's happening frequently. But part of the reason I think that there are so few glucagon prescriptions out there, it's partly on us as practitioners. We should do a better job. I try and ask about that at every clinic visit, but sometimes clinic visits are short and pressured, and something gets dropped. But I also think that part of it was that it was so intimidating to have to reconstitute glucagon that people thought, what are the chances that even if it happens to me, someone is going to be able to do that? And so I think there was a little sense of futility around, that 30% number. They thought, well, I'm going to have to go and explain this to my family members and maybe coworkers at work, and the chances of it working at all, not that if they give it, it won't work, but the chance of them successfully using it are low. So I'm just not going to do it. Now, though, with these new glucagons, with Baqsimi, it's just someone takes the thing and puffs it into your nose.
It is
Everyone can do that.
That's
an auto injector, you know, just like an EpiPen. You stick it against their leg or something, and it automatically goes in. So
like EpiPen, it's going to be. I'm just going to jump in. What are you going to say, Crystal?
I was just going to say that's such an interesting point, Stephen. You know, as a patient, I have in the past, and also being my son's sole caregiver and him possibly being my caregiver in that situation, I've actually intentionally have had, and I don't recommend anyone do this. This is not good. I've had my average blood glucose higher than it should be to avoid lows. And that, of course, then puts me at risk for complications later in life. And now that we have other options, it eases that pressure and that fear of having a severe low glucose emergency. So I'm really grateful for that. And yes, I, as a patient, can advocate for myself and talk to my healthcare practitioner about what to do and to have a prescription plan in place and have it with me in different places in my life so that it's always available if I need it.
And Kelly, one of the things that you had asked was, you know, how do we feel about 300,000 ER visits? Those are the ones those are the ones that are coded correctly. Okay. The number's probably higher than that. There are 27,000 people that die every year from severe hypoglycemia. It would be wonderful if everybody had one of the hypopens or the nasal or whatever, and they never used them. But
I know,
but
right?
They should have them just in case.
Like it's here. Gvoke is in my bag. And also, and like also, Paul, like thank you for making it possible to have it at zero copay. I mean, it is true if you are self-paying, you can't do that miracle yet. That's for all of us to work on. But having like making it a zero copay with all of those payers is a really huge thing. And we're going to talk about that more in just a couple of minutes. But I wanted to just say one thing to Steve. I mean, I love when you said, you know, like, oh, no one should feel bad. You know, I didn't mean to make you feel bad. And like, I just like almost started to cry. You know, it's like, I know you're not meaning that, but that is how like so many of us are wired. I don't know.
So I actually had a conversation with a psychologist who specialized with patients with living with diabetes, and she changed my life. She said to me, it's just data. It's not about you as a person. And that set me free from that. Like we have numbers, we have data, we have all these things. It's not something that we should internalize, but it often happens. And as a child, as a pediatric patient, I dreaded going to my endocrinologist. You know, I had to show my logbook when we had logbooks.
Oh my God, I know. I remember the first time that they could look up, they could just plug in your blood glucose monitor. And
and it had to match.
And then they put like a piece of paper, and I was like, oh God. I'm not going to be talking generalities here. I want to ask one more thing to the good doctor over here. Probably knows the answer to this too. But how does it work on the other side? Because I remember like, I mean, and I was always like thankful that I had this, and you can tell like I was, people have used that on me a bunch of times. And then like your blood sugar is super high. And it's just like, I deserve this because I'm bad. You know, that was sort of my experience of it. But how does it work with newer forms of glucagon? Are you supposed to go really high, or is there different kind of stability? Explain that to us, Steve, if you would.
Well, you're not supposed to go really high, but you know, how high you go is just going to depend on how much insulin, extra insulin there is that glucagon has to fight. It's sort of like a little bit of a cage match. The extra insulin and the glucagon have to fight it out, and where your glucose lands depends on how much extra insulin there was on board. And you know, if it goes high, higher than you'd like, the good news is that the glucagon wears off pretty fast, and so you know you'll come back down to equilibrium pretty soon. I would say it's pretty important not to see that high and then immediately think, oh, now I need to take some insulin to bring myself down. It's better just to give it a little time, let it come down on its own. Glucagon is pretty short acting. You know, use that time to make sure you're in a safe place and you have access to food, so that if it wears off and you're still in need of something, now you can take those carbs, and you won't have to give yourself a second shot. If you're by yourself, you may want to connect with someone else, just so you got a partner and manage. There could be a pretty big blood glucose spike, but that's a heck of a lot better than staying low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kelly, I would just add a couple of comments to that. The glucagon is a fascinating hormone in that it does tend to turn itself off at a certain point, and it goes away relatively quickly. So you can look at just about any of the different companies' clinical studies. You rebound and you can go high, but you don't end up with hyperglycemia. And that's one of the things that patients worry about. It's like, am I going to end up with hyper instead of hypo? By and large, it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting drug, because if your glucose is too low, it sort of kicks in, and if it's too high, it sort of stops working. It's a fascinating drug.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Is that like a sort of like the glycemic dependent thing that can happen with other new hormones? Steve, I have another question for Crystal, but real quick. But it sounded like you were going to jump in there.
Oh, I was just going to say that the rebound from glucagon, it's generally pretty transient and not too severe, and it's definitely less than if you have that horrible feeling of being low and eat a lot to try and deal with that. That's going to cause more of a long-lasting rebound that might have to be treated with insulin than glucagon will.
Yeah. The last time, I think since 2019, so I've used my Gvoke ones and I used Baqsimi ones, and both times, like I went up to, and I know this is like, I just couldn't even believe it. I went up to, one time it was 179 and one time it was 168. And I had to call my husband and say, whoa, you won't believe this. And it was so cute because he was like, oh, that's what we're supposed to have around that you never need to take. But I'm so glad that you took it, right? Because has been in this situation so many times when we first met, making sure that trained as a scientist, but that he knew how to use it. I was just trying to figure out also, Crystal, like, can you tell us just a little more? I mean, hearing about your son is incredible. Having this kind of glucagon available, how has your management of low blood glucose changed compared to when you were younger, even younger? I heard you say, by the way, a minute ago, well, now that I'm 35, like 35 is so young. You don't look anything like 35.
Well, thank you.
But compared to when you were really young, really little.
It's changed a lot. When I was younger, of course, older styles of emergency rescue kits have been scary, and I've done everything I can to avoid having lows. But when they did happen, I was thankfully always able to help myself. Now that I'm older, I think the biggest change is, of course, in having the conversations with my support network, with the people around me, and obviously here at home, it's just my son and I, but when I'm on the road, when I'm on tour, when I'm greeting fans and doing all of that stuff, my support network is my tour manager. It's my business manager. It's my band members. It's the driver of my vehicle. It's all of those people, and making sure that we have a team meeting to talk about what to do if I cannot help myself. That's, obviously if I'm able to help myself, then I go for my favorite candies and things, because it's a great excuse to eat them.
Right. They're all here. They're all right here.
I hear you.
They're all right here for me. But this is such a great segue, because we're going to talk about other uses. I saw your eyes really light up before we were talking about like this whole idea of mini dosing. But we just wanted to say kind of broadly now, with the existence of more stable glucagon, what other therapeutic opportunities become available? And Paul, we're going to go to you first, and then Steve, and then get Crystal's take on some of this.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Ready-to-use liquid glucagon is a new concept. It's never been out there. Like Steve said at the very beginning, the only and still today indication for glucagon is for rescue. But you do hear anecdotally about people who are mini dosing and microdosing in all kinds of situations. So, we, and I think, other companies are studying the use of liquid stable glucagon in mini doses and microdoses in a lot of different situations. When we talked the other day, we're studying it in exercise. So can you use a little bit of, like, our dose was 150 micrograms before exercise and not have a low? And can you do that without having to change your insulin or eat, candy bars while you're on the treadmill? It's those kinds of things. There are parents with children like Crystal. You send your child to school on a day and they're not feeling so well. And if that child has type 1 and you're worried that they're not going to eat right at school, there are people who mini dose before they send them off because they don't want to worry about them. And these are all situations. And the difficulty is, and we talked about this a little bit on our earnings call this morning, there is no regulatory pathway. There is no way that the FDA has considered prevention of severe hypo in the past. So we're plowing a new field here. We're doing everything we possibly can to get a form of liquid glucagon to the market that people can use for mini dosing or microdosing in some of these situations. We're studying it. We had 4 programs of different trials to try to get there. We've committed that it's something we need to do, and we're working with the FDA to try to find a way forward. But it's important.
I mean, I can see just me and Crystal like, whoa, that's really, really cool. Crystal, what do you think?
I think it's a wonderful new path to for sure. I'm not the most athletic person, but I know that sort of dosing would be beneficial for me. I don't like to eat before I perform, and that often will leave me with several hours of no carbs in my system. And if I have a low on stage, like I've said has happened before, microdosing would be something that would work in my world.
Your performance is more than an athletic event.
It takes time.
So you're up there for an hour and a half of
singing and prancing.
Aerobic exercise. You're doing an hour and a half of aerobic exercise when you're doing a concert.
Yes.
If it was indicated, it's not. I can't. I want to be clear. We're not trying to promote it that way. But if you could use a microdose of liquid glucagon before your athletic event and not have a low on stage, how cool would that be?
Sure. And it would go right along with using, I have a CGM that helps me also in predicting my blood sugar levels and everything. So all the technologies together, it's a wonderful way forward. It's something that would appeal to me for sure.
Yeah, we're working on it. It's going to take time.
Thank you.
Thank God the FDA has been wonderful about really trying in a dialogue to find a way forward.
Right.
A prevention claim, it's going to be too hard. It's going to be too expensive. But, we're working with them to try to find a way.
I love that. I want to ask Steve what his view of it, what he thinks his patients would think. But I just want to say also that thank you for saying that about the FDA. They're working on a lot of pretty amazing things to make things better, to make things better for us. There's a lot of opportunities for patients as well to even go tonight. I think the deadline is 9:00 Pacific time. By the way, I can't help put a little ad in here for this. If we want to think about type 1 diabetes in terms of staging and in terms of the ability, there is therapy now that was first piloted in 2007, anti-CD3, and there is going to be the chance to talk to FDA. They want to talk to us as patients. They want to talk to families of patients, all of that. And this could open an incredible new pathway, even to delaying type 1 diabetes. But Steve, so over to you, and I'm dying to hear about the closed loop and having 2 hormones. But anything else on microdosing?
Well, I think it really is an appealing idea to be able to have an alternative to taking carbs. You know, especially around exercise, people are trying to be fit, trying to, you know, maintain a healthy weight. And it can be very frustrating to folks to feel like every time they go to exercise, they have to take more carbs than they're using, take more calories than they're using in that workout. And so having a way to do that, I think, would be fantastic. And I think a lot of people would really like it. But I understand some of the regulatory challenges and maybe even some of the business challenges about getting that, because, you know, the carbs are cheap and the insurance company may say, you know, that's what you should use, even though, you know, we know that it's not great to be taking a lot of what I would call medicinal carbs. It might be better to be able to use glucagon to just take those carbs that are already waiting there, store it in your liver from the last time you ate, and just retrieve them when they're needed. And that's what glucagon would do. So I just really hope that the FDA and the companies can find a way forward to make that possible.
I could make an argument there. I remember in elementary school, first, second, third grade, I would have a snack in class. And of course, that's what I needed. But none of the other kids could have a snack in class. And I would get made fun of sometimes for that. And the psychological impacts are long lasting. I think that directly impacted why I was not as willing to share about having diabetes. And, you know, it'd be nice if we didn't have to have medicinal carbs in that way.
Yeah, I know. Even that idea, I know. So we have David Kendall I'm channeling him. He sent me a little text saying, with all of the attention and all of the newer preparations, the hope is to ensure that additional uses are studied, carefully assessed by the FDA. And Steve, he's nudging you here. It's so cool. He's saying the program with Beta Bionics of using stable glucagon in a bihormonal pump is one example. So, okay, that's a set. So tell us about that. And do you remember that one time I got to be in the trial? So you guys, just so you know, how researchers work to make these things a reality. But over to you, Steve.
Well, so I've been very fortunate to work with Beta Bionics team, and before that, Ed Damiano and Faraz El-Khatib, who developed the bionic pancreas. And the idea there is to be able to use microdoses of glucagon in an automated way when reduction of insulin or suspension of insulin is not sufficient. So of course, that system works like other automated insulin delivery systems, in that the insulin is modulated based on the blood glucose. But there are many cases where just suspending insulin isn't sufficient to avoid that low, and partly because insulin has such a long tail. And when you exercise, that can cause your blood glucose to drop faster than suspending insulin can avoid the low. And in that case, being able to automatically, not requiring somebody to take a mini dose or a microdose, but to automatically deliver that dose of glucagon to prevent that low without the person having to take any action, that's really the promise of what we call the bihormonal bionic pancreas, or the bihormonal islet. And it's still under investigation. We've done feasibility trials showing that when we do that, when we have the ability to use this counter hormone to insulin, we can be a little bit more aggressive with insulin dosing. We can get a lower average glucose, and yet actually even reduce the amount of hypoglycemia compared to an insulin-only automated insulin delivery system. So we can do two things that don't usually go together: lower the average glucose and at the same time reduce hypoglycemia. And people also like the system better. That they really like, people talk about, seeing their blood glucose drift lower, and then they don't do anything and it just goes right back up again. And, you can modulate the amounts that you give through a pump. So you give really just the amount you need, really tiny, tiny doses to just flatten out and make a soft landing, rather than, rebounding. You just have that automation technology to give just the amount you need to give you a little time for the insulin levels to come down. And we're moving forward to do a pivotal trial of the bihormonal islet next year. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, I heard those trials really filled up very, very quickly.
He's going to have room for you, I bet.
We haven't started enrolling for the bihormonal trial yet.
Yeah,
I want only one right now.
Hi. I want in.
I'd like to hear also from people in the audience, if you guys can share thoughts about the possibility of a bihormonal pump to increase time in range, to minimize hypoglycemia, and if you all can add any thoughts that you might have to the chat, that would be really cool. Paul, we've also seen data from DQ&A that said about 16% of people with diabetes weren't even confident they could stay safe from severe lows while exercising. We talked a bunch about exercising. How hard is this exercise piece going to be? It seems like the irony is kind of profound. Like, I'm exercising and then seriously I'm like dealing with all of this. But can you talk about I don't know, like to be in the field and be thinking about this right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, Steve talked about it a little bit too. It's counterintuitive. You reduce your insulin half an hour before exercise, the standard of care, right? You reduce your insulin half an hour before exercise, you eat carbs, you get on the treadmill and you eat while you're treadmilling, and then you get off and you eat some more. And you probably have burned fewer carbs than what you ingested while you were doing it. So, it is a problem, and it's something we have to try to deal with. At this point in time, bottom line is glucagon and our ready-to-use liquid glucagon and the other forms of ready-to-use glucagon are only indicated for rescue. And they're at doses that are higher than you would need in those exercise situations. So you can't really do it yet. And I think that's why the topic comes up all the time, because there's all these other ways people want to use glucagon, and the utility of ready-to-use glucagon is high. It's just going to take time. In the meantime, to your point, we now have a number of ready-to-use glucagons for rescue that are all going to change people's lives. The Gvoke HypoPen is going to change people's lives, and that's a great place to start.
Those stable liquid glucagon formulations got developed and approved, and have a model to get out there and generate some revenue for those companies, so they can help support studies with bihormonal bionic pancreas. So that was a critical step, and we're really appreciative that they're out there for our patients right now, because it's so much better alternative than what we had before, so much safer, so much more approachable. But then it also allows this promise for the future. When we started developing the bihormonal bionic pancreas, there was no stable glucagon, and we just had to hope that there would be. So we used the regular Lilly glucagon, reconstituted it, and used it for a day, and we had to replace it every day. And that's how we did all those studies. And that showed the promise that if we got a stable glucagon, this would be a way forward. But I don't know that those stable liquid glucagons would have been developed without the rescue indication. So
Correct.
I think there's some synergy here. It's good for both. And even when you have, let's say even when there was, everyone had the option to use a bihormonal bionic pancreas, which I hope will be the case in the future, there's still probably going to be the need for rescue glucagon occasionally.
Mm-hmm. We want to have it and just not use it, but
yeah,
we hand it out to everyone in every one of our trials.
Yeah, everybody's got. If you've got a severe allergy, you have an EpiPen, and if you're a practitioner and you have a patient with a severe allergy and you don't prescribe an EpiPen, that's people will look at you like you're crazy.
It makes me wonder about if there's just a lot of stuff in our heads and why it might not make sense all the time. But Crystal, you were going to jump in there.
Sure. I was just going to say, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I have this, assumption of the diabetes community at large that people are largely unaware of all of the hoops and loops that folks need to jump through, researchers and people doing all of the scientific work behind the scenes and with business and all of this. Like, what is that process like? Why does it take so long to advance, glucagon from unmixed, non-shelf stable emergency stuff? Like, what has taken so long? I remember as a young patient, they said, you have diabetes, no worries, there'll be a cure in 10 years. And yet, it takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's great question. There's no short answer to that. The bottom line is, it takes time to do these studies, and you've got to do them in a lot of patients, and you've got to do them, you've got to prove that it's safe, that it's effective. Even though there was a glucagon out there, when you formulate a now ready-to-use stable glucagon, you have to prove it's the same stuff. You have to prove it's still glucagon. And then you've got to put it in a lot of patients, and in the studies, you actually induce hypoglycemia, and then you rescue them. So those are very hard. You have to do it very carefully. And then we put it in an auto-injector, okay? And an auto-injector, when you go to the FDA, it has to fire. It has to work literally 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. And those are tough studies to do. And it's hard to manufacture. But like Steve says, and we appreciate the comments, that it's companies like ours and Zealand and others who are innovating and bringing new things forward, which will eventually enable what he's trying to do. That's going to come sometime in the future. We're all working toward the same thing.
Absolutely.
Making it easier for people to live with this disease.
Grateful for it.
I think the next poll is launched, so everybody in the audience, we'd love if you would answer that. If you or a loved one has diabetes and is at risk, do you have glucagon? And we're going to go back to those answers in just a second. But again, we know right now, latest DQ&A data says less than half of people with diabetes who are treated with insulin have emergency glucagon. And since glucagon, we know it's one of the best ways to address severe hypo. It stands to reason, the error of visits that we keep talking about could go down. Why is this? And I texted this question to David. One of the things just that we've been focusing on a lot at diaTribe were the ADA standards of care. We've been trying to understand them more and even translate them more, and to look at those and what those are, just the outline and definition of what care should be given for people with diabetes. What should healthcare providers follow? And he's talking to us about that. This obviously has a huge impact on policy. He's written those up. This new leader at Zealand has been in this amazing leadership role that Dr. Bob Gabbay has now, that Dr. Bob Ratner had before him. But just, we just asked him about how might the standards of care change even further. And he was telling us about how, it has to be public data. It's like the highest level evidence, and it is complicated to Paul's point. And, when we say what's the pathway for supporting healthcare providers' awareness of the updates to practice guidelines that would lead to greater implementation in clinical practice, what would lead to that? This is what he says. He says, as was suggested by others on the panel, rescue therapies like supply, CGM, access to care, is a necessary and essential part of one's diabetes management plan. So all of us are working with the professional organizations. That's like ADA, ABCES. You might know some of the other ones, like AAFP, AANP, ENDO, ACE, ACC. These are all kinds of different organizations. They're like the doctors get to be part of it. All have standards of care, and it does sound like it's certainly a very big priority. And the way that they work is getting the studies done, getting them published, and then getting people like our amazing community managers, Reese, to tweet about them, and put them on Facebook, put them on Instagram, so that we have more conversations he's saying more conversations that are at the same level. He also says, this is so cool, he's like, demand it, he's saying, to us patients, advocate for it. And he says, and we will work with ADA, EASD, your healthcare plans to make this a standard for your care. And then he added this: every patient using insulin or at significant risk for hypoglycemia should have this conversation with their provider. And all of us in the diabetes care community must commit to working with those who develop and publish these standards, disseminate the standards, and advocate for these standards of care. So I know that's kind of a mouthful. I never knew all this stuff was so official, but any comments on that, Steve? How hard is that to do? What do you want to see patients say to people like you, other people in your practice?
Yeah, I think that's really important to advocate for yourself. I mean, it really is incumbent on us to be aware of new drugs that come out, like these stable glucagons, to tell our patients about them. I actually like doing it because I like to be able to say, hey, I have this, new thing that's available and it's better. And, but, appointments are sometimes busy and there's, never enough time. So I think it really is important for people with diabetes to have their little list of questions. And if they don't have one of these better glucagons, these stable glucagons, ready to use glucagons, they should ask their provider to prescribe one for them, because it really is important. And, we should be trying to make sure that everybody in our clinic has access to them. But if we forget, please remind us. We'll appreciate it.
And adding on to that,
hold on 1 second. I'm just going to ask Crystal to jump in there because it looks like you had something back to Steve.
Sure. Sorry, Paul. Thank you. People can actually, if they need tips on how to start these conversations with healthcare providers, they can go to knowbeforethelow.com, and there are some wonderful tips there on how to start these conversations. Like Steven said, I mean, they have a lot of patients. They're seeing people once every 3 months, maybe 6 months. And if you're not in constant contact with your endocrinologist or your healthcare provider, they're not going to know maybe or even think to do it if it's not part of standard of care. So advocating for yourself is so important. So I do suggest people go to knowbeforethelow.com.
Yay, we're going to come back to that in a second. Paul, over to you.
I was going to say something kind of similar. It's like, don't feel like you're a bad patient. Okay, just I'm doing everything I can do. I'm doing as best I can, and there are just situations that I'm worried that there are times when I'm going to go low and it's going to be a problem, and I want to have that ready to use auto injector or whatever, just in case. If I never use it, great. But don't feel like you're being a bad patient by getting into that conversation with your physician.
I know, but you can't always dictate emotion, right? Crystal has all these lines in her song. I want it to be perfect for you. We want to be perfect. I just want you to take care of me. I mean, I know that I have felt like that with my doctor, but it's like, but I'm going to be this is my together day, when I'm going to be talking to Dr. Nancy and all of that. I think it's I hear you, and I'm so happy, Paul, that you're in this job. But what is that like, Crystal? Is it you can't get away from where you came from?
No matter where you go, there you are.
Yeah.
I mean, right?
That's Buckaroo Banzai.
I think one thing that has helped me over the last few years, as far as my growth and being able to bring hard topics up in diabetes related or not, if you're going to see your healthcare provider, it's good to make a list before you go when you're clear-headed and you can write it all out, because once you're in that office, time can be a precious commodity, and you may forget things, or conversations happen and you get sidetracked, and you don't want to leave having an emergency rescue plan off of your list of things you need to talk to your healthcare provider about. So trying to do a little work beforehand, it could help.
I would certainly appreciate being reminded if I forgot. I'd be a little embarrassed that I forgot, but I would appreciate the reminder.
Just tug on your lab coat.
And that's so good even to hear Steve say. I mean, just hearing you say that, I'm seriously, have you ever been embarrassed in your life? Or if we don't really think of you that way. But I'm so excited to see some audience questions here from Tim Hone. So why did it take so long to advance glucagon from the unmixed, non-shelf stable? I love it, patience. It's so cool how we sound so official. Why did it take so long to advance glucagon from the unmixed, non-shelf stable emergency stuff? What was the block? What happened in 2019? And we're going to do these as lightning rounds so we can get through a bunch of these. But thank you, Tim.
I think we kind of already answered that one. In terms of what takes a long time. In 2019, the FDA took longer to review both Lilly and us. They just delayed both of them. They just didn't get their work done on time. And they've got a lot to do. So
what was it like? Just give us like a tiny bit of this. Like, what was it like when you got the letter? I heard there's what'd you think?
I aged another 10 years. As a little company with the first product in front of the FDA, you don't want to get a delay. But we knew why, and it was easily solvable, and we knew we were going to be fine.
It was addressable, and I mean they
wanted more data. They wanted more data on the actual reliability of the injector, the Gvoke HypoPen. We gave it to them. It was fine, and then what took even longer. And if the question is, then we had to take the time to scale up to manufacture it. That took a long time. So
and the fact that you've done that is cool, but I think also sometimes we don't know, you guys, we don't always know everybody working collectively, working in community. It's pretty amazing. I remember, Steve, I used to hear all the time, oh my God, but then you would have to do a study of glucagon, oh my God, a fate worse than death. And I get it that was really hard. So I'm so happy that Zealand has done that. But look at you guys. All right, question from Julie Newman. How can adults, this is great. How can adults obtain a microdose pen, the child dose pen? And to be clear, do you feel that the Gvoke pen raises blood glucose less than the dextrose that is given by the paramedics? Oh my God, yeah. Go over to you, Paul. So
the medical part of that one, Steve should probably answer. Dextrose and glucagon, you're going to get the same effect at the end of the day, I think, right, Steve?
Probably. I think, unfortunately, that the answer to the first question is there isn't such a microdose pen available right now.
Not yet.
Yeah. But we hope that there will be at some point. And, in terms of comparing how much glucose is raised by a full dose from a Gvoke pen versus IV dextrose, well, of course, that just depends on how much IV dextrose they choose to give. So unfortunately, there's not a way to definitively answer that question.
Yeah, the part about the child dose, there is a children's pen, which is a 0.5 milligram, and there's an adult pen, which is a full milligram. If the question is about, is there an appropriate dose for kids, the answer is yes.
But it's not a microdose, I guess, is the point. It's just a rescue dose. It's just a rescue dose for tiny humans.
Yeah, it's a rescue dose for kids 2 years and 2 to 12.
Yeah, and I am always here to say that the microdosing is a potential thing in hormonal pump, and that's not approved yet. We had also a question from Marie Pillar. What would be the difference between microdosing glucagon and chewing a glucose tab?
Well,
the flavor.
And that, you might keep eating the glucose tabs. I don't know. I pull them out. I have them. It's locked up because.
I will say that glucagon typically works faster than taking oral glucose, which is an advantage that glucagon has. Oral glucose, it's got to make its way down your throat, through your stomach, and then into the small intestine to get fully absorbed, and that can take a little while. Glucagon, it's really important to mention, and we haven't mentioned this yet, insulin is absorbed, even rapid-acting insulin is absorbed fairly slowly after it's injected. It doesn't reach a peak level in your blood for 60, 70 minutes or more. Glucagon isn't like that. Glucagon is absorbed much, much faster. It peaks at 15 or 20 minutes, And it starts to act typically within 5 minutes. We've done clamp studies, and you can see a start of an effect within 5 minutes. That's much faster than a glucose tab. So
yeah. Sorry, Steve.
That's an advantage.
That's why it's so effective in rescue. I mean, that's the purpose of glucagon at the end of the day is rescue, and that's one of the reasons it's so good.
This is so cool. I mean, Crystal, I don't know. Like I guess I'm just feeling like, God, like diabetes is supposed to be complicated. It's so cool to hear about how things could be. The question that I'm going to say is the very last question, just a line from each of you. You know, what's the single biggest thing that you want to leave people with now that we're in 2021? What we'll go Steve, Paul, and then Crystal. And then I'm just going to give a couple of final words. But this has been amazing. It's been like also pretty emotional. So
I guess what I would say is that everybody should have an easy to use rescue plan, which right now should involve having one of these ready to use glucagons. And if your provider doesn't propose it, you should ask, and you should make sure that happens. And I wouldn't even wait till your next visit, honestly. I would reach out and say, hey, I hear there's these new forms of glucagon available, and I'd really like to have one. And your provider should do that for you.
Love it. Paul, you're up next.
I would echo that. I would echo that. You know, if you're on insulin, you should have a rescue plan, and that plan should include a ready-to-use liquid glucagon or a ready-to-use glucagon, such as the Gvoke HypoPen. And I would encourage healthcare professionals to really, you know, think more about asking the question, making sure that when they're prescribing insulin, they're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm gonna give an emotional musician artist response here. I think the thing that I'd like to leave people with for 2021 is that, I mean, during this pandemic, we've learned so much about ourselves as people and what's really important, our loved ones, our friends, our family. And I think that the most important thing is hope and knowledge. We're empowered by knowledge and as people living with diabetes to know what to do in case of a low blood glucose emergency. Knowledge is power, and that's the thing. Have a plan in place.
Oh my God, that's poetry. It is, Crystal. It really is. This is from David. In the future, we should ensure that all patients, all caregivers, all care partners, all of those affected by diabetes and all at risk for hypoglycemia have access not just to glucagon rescue products, but to all the tools that improve their lives, improve their care, improve the outcomes. What more could we say? Except I think also, like, my last thing would maybe be also remember to say thank you to your healthcare provider. I mean, hearing a lot of what has been said about this, it's also really hard to be in their shoes. And I don't think, Steve, we ever think of any of you as like forgetting anything or like stressed about the time or you know, that anything has happened in the office that is unexpected. And the fact that you all turned on a dime for us this year, so many of you did. Those of us who are really lucky to have telecare, that is truly extraordinary. And also for so many of the payers, I mean, I think the payers and the government are really, really starting to look at diabetes more closely, right? So we're so grateful. Thank you so much again to all of you for being here with us and for giving a bunch of us patients and family members a lot of hope. All right.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you for inviting us.
This is called Until Then. You painted me a picture of something you thought I would like to see. Your face to me like scripture, a book I've always intended to read. mother's mind and bravery, your father's hard-earned lines and stubbornness. Oh no, your demons couldn't shake me, but they drove you like a train that came and went. I couldn't slow you down. Oh no, 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 nothing could slow you down. But if you turned around, baby, well, the headlights are fading. Come on home, baby, I'll be here. Until then, honey, I'll be waiting till that last bright burning star disappears. You ain't much for conversation, you said, because there's way too much to say. Leaving town is easy, but love is complicated, and that's why you couldn't stay. I couldn't slow you down. Oh no, 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 nothing could slow you down. But if you turned around, baby, well, the headlights are fading. Come on home, baby, I'll be here. Until then, honey, I'll be waiting till that last bright burning star disappears. Oh, yeah, yeah. I couldn't slow you down, no. Oh, no, no. Oh, nothing could slow you down. Please turn around, baby. Well, the headlights are fading. Won't you come on home, baby? Don't you know I'll be here, baby? Well, the headlights are fading. Come on home, baby, I'll be here. Until then, honey, I'll be waiting till that last bright burning star disappears. Until then, honey, I'll be waiting till that last bright burning star disappears. Mm, yeah.